We're live. Welcome to the 56th edition of the Boxing Gossip podcast. Can see we've got 25 of you already in the chat. Shout out to everyone who's already joined. I can see there's a few of the regulars in the chat. So good evening to you all. Hope everyone is doing well. Regular viewers will know, haven't been as busy as normal on the channel recently. I've been away. So we didn't do a podcast last week, and as a result, we've got a kind of double podcast tonight in terms of we're going to be covering the fights from the last 2 weeks, the news stories from the last 2 weeks, etc. It hasn't been the busiest time in boxing, I guess you could say, so probably not the worst week to miss last week, but still quite a lot to get through tonight. Joining us on the panel tonight, we of course have Jet, we have Jay. Paul, I believe, is unable to join tonight, and Irish Tom isn't with us yet. Understand he's busy at the minute, but he will be joining later on in the show. Now, a lot of the topics that we're going to cover tonight are topics that I haven't covered separately on the channel. You know, usually when we do one of these podcasts, I've covered a lot of the topics elsewhere in videos. But as I say, because I've been away for a week or so and haven't been making regular videos, I may well chirp in a bit more as a panelist than I usually do when we do these podcasts. So without further ado, we'll get it rolling. 50 of you already watching us live. If you are watching live, please hit the thumbs up button nice and early. Please subscribe if you haven't already done so, and that should help get some more people joining us live tonight and get some more visibility to the show. So in terms of boxing, we're going to discuss the 2 weeks of boxing that I haven't covered on the channel. So that includes Adonis Stevenson fighting Andre Fonfara in the rematch nobody wanted. That includes Eleider Alvarez taking on John Pascal and being victorious. There was some boxing on the Frank Warren side with Bradley Skeet and Harley Ben. There was Haskins versus Ryan Burnett last week. There was Mike Perez last week. So a few bits of boxing that we've missed and that we haven't covered in the channel. Let's start by bringing in Jet. Jet, how are you doing?
Hello. Hope everyone's well.
Good. Thanks for joining, mate. Thanks for joining. And just to give Jet a plug, check him out on his channel, Boxing Discussions, as well. I understand he's been putting up some new videos very recently, actually. So don't give him a check right now, but give him a check after the podcast. Jet, what stands out for you from all of the action from the last 2 weeks?
Well, yeah, I mean, you mentioned all the fights, Stevenson, Eleider Alvarez, Haskins and Skeet, those sort of fights. I've watched pretty much all of them, so I can give you a brief rundown if you want that, or if you just want me to, you know, put down what.
Mate, go through them. Yeah.
Stevenson, obviously, he got a 2-round, victory over Fonfara. He beat up Fonfara pretty bad, to be honest, in the 2 rounds that it lasted. He did what he needed to do. No one really wanted to see the rematch, but he nothing really to say on Stevenson unless he actually steps in with someone of note. I think Gvodchik, the Ukrainian standout prospect, is his mandatory. Also after Alvarez is the mandatory, and he's the mandatory after that, basically. So Alvarez won against Pascal. Didn't look so good. I know you're high on Alvarez, but for me, he's very basic. I can't buy into him, to be honest. I thought Pascal took multiple rounds of him, and Pascal hasn't looked good in his last few fights. So Alvarez is decent. He's a good fringe, well-level guy, but for me, he at the top of the 175 division. I don't think he's great. Skeet, I did watch him. He looked impressive, but Singleton, he got taken out by Sam Higginson, so it's expected of Skeet. Harley Ben didn't look too great. He looked like he rushed his work a lot, but he's still young in his pro career, so time to develop. Picking a bunch, probably Haskins versus Burnett. To be honest, that's the fight I watched most in depth, or at least the card I watched most in depth. The card by the American judge was terrible. Obviously, the IBF has come out and said it's a you know, it's a mistake. But you know, you're sort of officiating a world title fight and you don't know one from the other. It's you know, it's ludicrous. Let's be honest. But you know, you know, Burnett, he didn't look great against Ryan Farag in his last fight in the Liverpool Bill on the Matchroom side, but I do think he improved a hell of a lot. You know, Haskins probably coming towards the tail end of his career, very good fighter in his own right, but Burnett kind of, you know, neutralized all of the threat, and I thought he outboxed the boxer, and he did very well at times. You know, he came in close, he brought the fight in close, and he neutralized Haskins there. Then he neutralized him from range. Perez obviously got a blowout win. Not really much to say on that, but yeah, not been the most stellar of weeks, but I guess some action's better than none.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit more about that scorecard, because in my opinion, that is probably the biggest discussion point of the last fortnight's boxing. So when I first heard that scorecard, I thought, obviously, it's a clear case of the judge scoring it to the wrong fighter. And, you know, that became more obvious as the scorecard became published, and he'd given Haskins 10-8 rounds in Haskins' favour in the rounds where Haskins had actually been down. So my first thought watching this fight was, oh, it's clearly a mistake. It's not that much to worry about. But then as I thought about it, Jet, I actually thought potentially that's an even worse, you know, situation than the judge who genuinely believed that, you know, the fighter who lost had won. Because, you know, now we look back at it, how many times has there been a split decision? How many times has there been a majority decision or a close fight where the judge, you know, could have got the wrong fighter, could have got confused between which guy is actually which? And, you know, when that happens, would that not get picked up upon if it was, you know, if it wasn't such a one-sided fight? I mean, what's your thoughts on that, Jet?
Yeah, I mean, it could have been devastating for Ryan Burnett in terms of he could have lost, you know, he could have lost the fight if it, you know, another judge sort of had, you know, had Haskins as Burnett and Burnett as Haskins. It's very dubious. I mean, as I said, I did make a video just before we came on air, and I did say, you know, in the video that it's bad because it's happening every so often. It's happening on every other Matchroom card. And whether or not it's the wrong decision, you know, it's a controversial decision, or it's just the wrong scorecard for the wrong guy, it's embarrassing for one, Eddie Hearn on his cards, live on Sky. It's got to be embarrassing for them as a broadcaster. And in terms of just British boxing in general, it's got to be at its kind of at its knees. I mean, in terms of, you know, where do we go from here? We're having bad scorecards every other week. And yeah, you know, it's difficult for us. I think boxing fans, it's very, very difficult. We look at sort of the, you know, the landscape of British boxing, and we think, oh, well, you know, this guy's going to come over and get a bit of a dodgy scorecard. Luke Campbell might get a dodgy scorecard against this guy if it goes 12 rounds, for example. And yeah, it is, you know, it's a bit bad, but I guess the right man won in the end, which was the main thing. But, you know, as we do say, or as you say, to quote Dwyer, knockouts cause amnesia. Even though it wasn't a knockout this time, it was a dodgy scorecard. It does, you know, raise doubt over potential future dealings in the sport, especially in Britain, I guess.
Yeah. As for Ryan Burnett, he's someone who I haven't been overly sold on the way up. You know, I've kind of been dubious about him throughout his career, and was dubious about him going into this fight. By far the best I've seen from Ryan Burnett. I thought that Adam Booth had really established an Adam Booth style with Ryan Burnett. You know, hands down, very explosive, not like overly defensive. You know, quite flowing power punches, quite you know, offensively minded. I liked what I saw. Actually, like a relatively, you know, there's a few names in that division, even domestically. You know, domestically, you've got the likes of of Paul Butler, who I rate very highly, Stewie Hall, Lee Haskins, Ryan Burnett, Jamie McDonnell. On the world stage, you've got Zolani Tete, who I believe is one of the best fighters in the world. Yamanaka, Solis. There's a few names. Where do you think he kind of sits, Jet?
Yeah, I mean, they called out the Zakianov fight, the guy who beat Raushi Warren in his last fight, the Ricky Hatton fighter. If you don't know who it is, he's an Eastern European guy who trains in, I'm sure, Manchester with Ricky Hatton.
Is he the guy who fought Rassi Warren?
Yeah. He beat him
for
WBA, and I think he fought for the IBO or something like that as well. So WBA Super, and Jamie McDonnell holds WBA regular. I know it's really stupid and confusing, but it's WBA typical rubbish. So they've obviously said they want to make that fight. I'd assume that's a relatively easy fight to make. Zakianov is in the UK. He trains in the UK. It was obviously promoted and managed by Ricky Hatton. So, yeah, I'd assume that, that'd be an easy fight to make. But for me, if I was Ryan Burnett, I'd take a few steps back, just kind of learn a bit more. He's very young. He's only 25. He's had a very good win over a very good opponent. I think he's the weakest of the 4 or 5 champions, however you want to say it, in terms of just experience. I think in terms of talent, he might be able to beat Zakianov. I think he's a good pressure fighter, but I think he can combat that style, especially if he has a few more fights. So yeah, he's there or thereabouts, but against someone like a Tete, I wouldn't put him in with a Tete, and I don't think that fight's going to get made anyway, with Tete being with BT Sports and Box Nation, and Burnett being with Eddie, and he's obviously got a bit of a profile now since he's got the world title win, especially in Belfast. So yeah, he's there. He's towards the bottom end of the division in terms of the champions, but he's definitely got room to improve. And yeah, he looked a lot better than he did in the Farag fight. And he seemed to improve a lot. So I guess we'll wait and see with him. He's a likable fighter in terms of his style. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely. Jet, one final question before we'll go over to Jay. Mike Perez. Obviously, we learned very, very little from his fight this weekend. What we did learn is that he can make £200. He can make £200 comfortably, and he's a guy who, is obviously becoming very dedicated to the sport. Now, I've always viewed Mike Perez as a fighter of world championship ability. If we look back at some of his fights at heavyweight, he was schooling Carlos Takam 5 rounds up to 0 till he ran out of gas. He was schooling Bryant Jennings, pretty much whitewashed Jennings in the first half of their fight before he ran out of gas. If he's fighting smaller guys where his punching power is a lot more relevant, and if he's able to stay in this kind of shape, and one would presume he'd be able to last a lot longer in terms of stamina at this kind of shape that he's in now, is he a serious threat to world title level?
Yeah, I mean, again, I spoke about him in the video I made just before we came on air, and I do think he looks the part. If he can, fight for a consistent pace at 12 rounds, he looks in serious shape, and he looks in better sort of mental condition, I guess, than what he has been in the last few years. I know he's taken an extended break of boxing, so he looks like he's back motivated, physically and mentally motivated for the division. I do think that there's guys out there that are beatable for him. It's just if Perez can actually, sustain a 12-round pace. We know he can do it at a certain level at heavyweight, especially for the first half of the fight, but the second half, he tends to run out of gas, as you said. So, there is that potential concern moving down to heavyweight with obviously him having to cut weight and make 200 pounds. But he looks in, as I said, fantastic condition. And you said he looks in great condition. So maybe that holds him in good stead, and maybe he's able to fight at that 200-pound limit, with effective sort of, I wouldn't say aggression, but, effective force, let's say that. And yeah, I mean, in terms of skills, his skill set is second to none. He's got a fantastic skill set, and let's say he's one of the most stylish and skillful guys, even at cruiserweight, even though he hasn't fought anyone. So he's got a He's really skillful. He can mix it with the best of them, but we need a few fights to see where he's at. I'd like to see him in with a couple of durable journeymen. He's not necessarily an old man either, so he's still got a bit of time. Gather some momentum in his career and push on for a world title. I hope he does it. He seems like a nice bloke as well.
Yeah. No, totally agree. One thing we'll come on to when we get to the news section of the pod is the World Super Series tournament, because some names have been announced, to take part of that in the cruiserweight division. But let me say, if I was Eddie Hearn, with that relationship he's got with the Sauerlands, I would be lobbying them to put Mike Perez in that tournament, because Mike Perez is not a huge ticket seller. He's not a pay-per-view draw. But if he goes in that tournament, he can make massive waves for me, and he can win that tournament if things play out for him well. He really can. He's a real talent. Anyway, thanks for that, Jet. Let me bring Jay in. Jay, how you doing, mate?
I'm good, mate. You?
Yeah, very good. Thank you, pal. Very good indeed. Jay, as you probably heard, they're discussing all of the fights from last couple of weeks in no particular order, mate. But I'll let you tee off with any of the fights that you want to get your 2 pennies worth in on.
Where should I start? Probably start with Skeet Singleton. It was a pretty enjoyable fight at times. I mean, Skeet talks about being world level. He talked about holding on to the British title, defending it. And then he talked about Sam Eggington in an interview and saying he's above European level and he believed that he could walk straight into like world level fights. I'm not so sure whether that's wishful thinking or that's just he's a type of fighter that needs good opponents to perform. I think early on in that fight, Singleton gave him a few problems. He was tentative when he was fighting. He didn't really commit. He wasn't really popping that jab out enough like he likes to do. Singleton caused him problems. But as soon as the knockdown came, you could see Skeet's confidence just grow. And that's when he really came into the fight, started popping the jab. And, and the first 2 knockdowns, it wasn't necessarily hurt. He wasn't necessarily hurt, Singleton, but more mad with himself, it kind of seemed. But he's a tough kid. But, there was some good, clean, accurate punches from Skeet. Whether he can go from British level straight to world level is a question that's unanswered, to be honest.
100%, yeah. And when he stepped up in levels, I know he did very well against Sam Eggington, but he didn't look like a world-class fighter. And when he fought Frankie Gavin, he certainly didn't look like a world-class fighter. So I think he's really lacking that European level title fight. I think that kind of experience would bring him on a bit, and certainly that's what I'd like to see him steered towards.
Yeah, that is a concern. But he that he jumped straight into that world level, gets a punishment, gets a beating, and then has to drop back down again. I think he needs to go from the old route of British level to European level, and then let's look for a bigger fight. But when they asked him, if a big name come knocking in the top 10, would he take it? And his opinion was pretty much, yeah, of course I would. Which
he probably hasn't earned much money in his career, and welterweight is a money division. But I think he could turn into a Leon Walsh type figure if he's not brought along correctly, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think you're totally correct there. It's a very strange thing that he wants to. I mean, maybe it's not strange that he wants to hold on to that British belt, but you are, as you said, earning only so much for 3-4 fights, 5 fights. So it's a bit of an odd one, but he has some. He's got a lovely jab. He's got a really good popping jab, and when he uses it, he can be quite effective. But it's like in that fight, until he knocked Singleton down, the confidence really wasn't there to really take the fight to him. So, only time will tell really what his next step will be. Stevenson from Farah, it's not a fight I really wanted to see. I watched it, obviously, because this is what we do and we need to talk about these things. But Stevenson looked good. He looked sharp. He was on his toes. He moved well. But it was a Fanfara that was nowhere near his best. I think at one point, he's always looking for that left hand. Stevenson. At one point, he must have hit him with about 10 consecutive left hands, just bum, 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 bum. And it really, you know, he looked like a class above. The problem is with Stevenson, we know that he doesn't come out of Canada, and he hasn't come out of Canada for maybe once, I think. And until he does that, you know, he's not really going to get the respect that he may necessarily thinks he deserves. And then we had Alvarez and Pascal, future opponent. Alvarez, he's good. I wouldn't say he's great. He's consistent. He does the basics really well. You know, Pascal is tough though. He's very tough, and I think a lot of people thought that Alvarez should have put Pascal out there quite easily and quite handedly. But Pascal's tough, and he'll go the rounds. Alvarez, yeah, as I said, he does the basics really well. The scorecards. One scorecard out there's a draw, which I didn't see at all. But you know, clear winner in Stevenson. He's rangy, but I'm not convinced. I don't know whether I think he's a good fighter. I don't think he's a great fighter. I don't think he's going to be one of the greats of the division. Personally, I know a lot of people have a lot of expectations for him, but me, not so much. But there's a lot of good fights out there. You know, Stevenson, Ward, Smith Jr., Berbatov. You know, they're out there for him. So again, it's another fighter. We'll wait and see when he steps up. And I think Stevenson and him, are they both Canadians? Am I right? Yeah.
Yeah. They may actually be training partners, if I'm not mistaken.
So, you know, it sets it up well, doesn't it, for another Canadian fighter and in Montreal or somewhere like that. And you know, so it sets it good for TV. But you know, Stevenson quickly came after his fight that he wants to fight Kovalev or Ward. Well, we've heard it before, and whether he'll step up is a different thing altogether, really. So, yeah. What else were we talking about? Burnett. Burnett.
Perez, yeah.
Burnett, he's a typical Booth-esque fighter, isn't he? You know, you see, he's a carbon copy of what you're going to get from a Booth fighter. He's good. Hands are low, which I hate. You know, I'm always concerned about that, about a boxer's career, if his hands are low. But he doesn't waste punches. He doesn't waste energy. Everything connects. Everything is accurate. Everything's with intent. And that's what I really like about him, you know. And that is a Booth, something that Booth obviously drills into his fighters. You don't waste unnecessary energy, unnecessary punches. Make your punches connect and make them count. You know, he got caught a couple of times, but Haskin is a counter puncher, and I think Burnett likes to do that. They're both not fighters that have high tempos and use a lot of punches. So there was a lot of edginess and there was a lot of standoffish. But then I think connecting those punches that he does throw, it hurt Haskins, and Haskins really from about the fourth, I think he was complaining to the ref, and you could kind of see that he wasn't happy in there, and that it was going to be a long night for him. I mean, Haskins wasn't a great champion. He wasn't a great champion. He's not what I would call a great champion. And I think it was time that when, I mean, Haskins who was it before?
Stuart Hall.
Haskins. Stuart Hall, yeah. So he had problems with Stuart Hall. Stuart Hall's quite rangy, and he had real problems. And that kind of said to me, look, the moment you step up and fight someone of real good quality, you know, you're gonna come crashing down. And I think Burnett is a star of the future, and he will only rise, and he's on the rise. So I wasn't surprised that he took that fight quite handedly. As far as the judging, I mean, words fail me. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that this guy didn't know apparently he asked the photographer if who Haskins was, and someone told him he's the guy in the red short. I mean, who Haskins was, and who's the guy in the red shorts, something like that. So it's quite unbelievable that he didn't know who was who from the start. If you look back at the fights he's refed, he's judged. There hasn't been no real big fights, you know, and I do wonder whether the IBF are aware how bad he is, whether he's had issues before. But you know, they've said British Boxing Board of Control have said that they're not going to ever use him again, and he's banned from judging in the UK, and hopefully for the rest of the world, because that man should not ever be a judge.
No, that's a bad enough error to, to mean there's not very much coming back from that, I'm afraid. Yeah, what about Mike Perez, Jay? Obviously, we didn't learn too much from that fight, but what's your take on Perez and his comeback?
Last minute opponent change. They pulled out, the Irish fighter pulled out. Why? We don't really know. Could be numerous reasons. He looked in great shape. He looked the best that I'd ever seen him, obviously. He's lost a lot of that extra weight, that flabbiness. He looks toned, he looked good, but we didn't learn nothing from that. And has he got that engine? You talked about him fading late in fights and things like that. Not necessarily because he's lost the weight, because he's in better shape. Will he get that engine? That's not necessarily true. It just might not be in him. So I think it was just a fight to say that he is on that. He's in that weight division now, and let's see, what he can do. And it's out there for him. It's a pretty good division. You talked about the Muhammad Ali Trophy. If it would be a good name to put in there, because you're not going to get Tony Bellew, so let's just stick Mike Perez in there instead.
Yeah, absolutely. And seeing as we're finished really discussing last week's boxing, let's go on to the news, and let's start with that actually as the first story to discuss. So 3 big names have been announced for the cruiserweight version of the tournament. IBF World Cruiserweight Champion Murat Gassiev, WBC World Champion Marius Bradis, as well as former IBF WBC Champion challenger Krzysztof Wlodarczyk. There you go. So those 3 have all been confirmed. I've seen Kudryashov saying that he'd like to be included, whereas Denis Lebedev has ruled himself out. Obviously, Tony Bellew won't be taking part either. So, Jay, what's your take on that lineup? And as we start getting closer to it, is it becoming more mouthwatering, mate?
Yeah, it's definitely something that we want to see. It's good for that division. Who you're going to get in there with? So who they announced already? Sorry, I forget.
So they've announced 3 names, and just so we're clear, the first fights here are going to take place September time. So should start to be fights announced fairly soon. But Murat Gassiev, Marius Bradis, and Krzysztof Wlodarczyk. So
you've got two belt holders there in Gassiev and Bradis. So that's good. So there's belts. There will be belts on the line, I take it, or that the belts will change hands if necessary.
You have to presume so.
So that's a good thing straight away. So we could end up with some sort of unified if we get Lebedev in there, Usyk in there. It's a stacked division really with good fighters, but not necessarily big names as such. So the only concern is whether it generates the attention from the wider public and not just the hardcore boxing fans. Because out of them, probably. Out of that division, probably Bellew is the biggest name, isn't he, really? And would bring something to that tournament. So I think they would be quite desperate to get him on, but that's not going to happen. He's not really going to entertain that tournament. So, yeah, Usyk we need, really. I like to see Huck in there. There's Arslan, Makubu. There's plenty of names out there, but I think it's more mouth-watering and more interesting for the real hardcore boxing fans really than anyone else. Because if you go and ask someone in the street who Usyk is, you know what the answer is going to be.
Yeah, I think Usyk is super key to getting this to be a success. Actually, even though, as you correctly say, he's not a major name and he's not a major fan favourite among the casual boxing fan, but this is a tournament that at the minute is very much going to appeal to the hardcores. And having a guy like Usyk in there kind of allows you to say, this tournament is to be the #1 cruiserweight in the world. But I think if Usyk is conspicuous by his absence, it's kind of hard, really. He is the consensus #1 cruiserweight in the world, and it's kind of hard to hand out that title without him present, in my opinion, Jay.
Yeah, I think he has to be there, and I think he will. I don't think there's anything stopping him in the way, because at the end of the day, the only reason Bellew is not in it because he's got bigger fights out of it. So he's got a Haye fight or a Wilder fight or a Parker fight. Usyk, he needs to fight the people in his division. Now, if all the top guys in that division are in that tournament, then he's got to go there, because while that tournament's happening, who's he going to fight? It's as simple as that, really.
Totally agree. Jet, do you want to get in on this one, mate? So far, so good on the tournament front.
Yeah, it looks like a good starting lineup, I guess. Interesting to see, as Jay said, interesting to see who they would potentially get. But yeah, not too much else to add. It's something I guess of interest for the hardcores, definitely.
Absolutely, and we'll continue to cover that on the podcast as more names are announced, and hopefully in the other division as well. And yeah, with the intention being for the quarterfinals to take place September, October, we should be getting a full roster list of fighters, and hopefully the initial fights announced sooner rather than later. Jet, let me ask you, I guess one of the topics we have to discuss clearly is the Chris Eubank versus Arthur Abraham pay-per-view bill that has been announced at Wembley Arena. On the undercard, Kid Galahad versus Dennis Salem, which is an interesting fight. A few other bits of talent in there as well. Robbie Davis Jr. versus TBA on the undercard. There's also a fighter I really like. I like him so much that I've actually almost forgotten his name. Bear with me for 1 second. Chris Congo, I want to say, who I saw live on the last Eubank undercard, but he's also on it and he's one to watch. Let's have your take on that bill, Jet. Its pay-per-view status, the undercard, the fight itself, and if you want to go on to it, mate. Also, if you want to perhaps discuss Eubank's comments re Kell Brook, which seemed to kind of, I know we discussed that till the cows come home with Irish Tom last podcast, but that also seemed to grab a lot of the headlines again as this fight was announced.
Yeah, I mean, the card is obviously not a pay-per-view card. It's on ITV pay-per-view. And I did make a video before, so I hope everyone does not buy this card because Eubank does not deserve the attention. But anyway, the fights on the card itself aren't terrible, you know. Robbie Davis Jr. is actually fighting a 18 or 19-1 prospect, if I'm correct. I saw it on Twitter just before we came on air.
Okay.
So, yeah, not a terrible fight. He's probably defending his WBA Continental 140 title, something like that. He's number 3, I think, in the rankings. So seems like a decent fight on paper. Let's see how that one turns out. I think fight of the night is on this card is Dennis Salem versus Kid Galahad. I think that's a fantastic fight, you know, especially in terms of the actual card itself. You know, for me, Dennis Salem is a typical European style fighter. Pumps out the jab, and you know he has that sort of high guard. Did very well against Ryan Walsh after getting knocked down in the first round, especially to go on to win the fight. But you know, for me, he's a bit below the world level guys. The world level guys at featherweight, Gary Russell Jr., Oscar Valdez, Leo Santa Cruz, Carl Frampton. Those guys, I think he's a bit below them. You know, he can definitely mix it with the guys like Scott Quigg, Simeon. You know, those guys who are fringe world level or European level guys. Kid Galahad, I've never been sold on him, I'll be honest. I know he trains with Dominic Ingle and Kell Brook and trains up in Sheffield. But for me, he's a drug cheat. You know, he's obviously, my brother spiked my drink, which is pretty absurd. And yeah, I've just never been sold on his skills. I know some people are quite high on him, but I've never really seen I just never really seen the hype behind him. Eubank versus Arthur Abraham, not a terrible fight either. Not a pay-per-view fight, but not a terrible fight. Abraham definitely has a name over in the States a little bit, over in the UK and over in Germany. He's actually a big ticket seller in Germany, if I'm correct. So, you know, he has some respectable name. He's a respectable opponent as well. My concern is that he's coming off you know, not really a loss, but he fought Krasniqi last time, and Krasniqi is kind of just known for going the rounds or getting beaten up. But his last meaningful fight, I guess, was against Gilberto Ramirez, and he got 12-0 pretty much. So my concern is that, you know, Eubank isn't going to stop him, because I think Arthur Abraham has a good chin. But, you know, he's just going to be in there going the rounds quite easy. I don't know why he's coming over to the UK if he sells a lot of tickets in Germany. So maybe he's kind of coming towards the tail end of his career. But I'd expect Eubank to win a wide points decision, if I'm honest. You know, I wouldn't expect Arthur Abraham to cause him too many problems. He's a bit basic. He's a bit plodding as well at times. So, and I thought he did struggle a lot with Paul Smith as well, even though Paul Smith was a slightly different fighter to Eubank, and probably not on the level of Eubank. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on that card. Eubank, talking about Brook, he needs to keep his mouth shut, because he gets airtime, don't get me wrong, but you know, the moment it happens to him, the whole boxing community is going to jump on his back, and especially Eubank Senior's back. So yeah, he needs to focus on himself. Why he didn't fight Golovkin, that's his own doing. That's his own team's doing. He needs to concentrate on himself and concentrate on his fake world title. Yeah, I just haven't really got too much to say on him. I'd prefer not to give him any airtime, but it seems Eubank equals views and ratings. So yeah, there it is.
I thought it was ill-advised comments, because if Eubank Senior is in the corner for his son, and if his son's taking a right pasting, if his son's got a horrific cut, if his son's got an orbital bone with injury which could affect his sight, Eubank's going to be standing there with the towel. And, you know, at that point, it shouldn't be going through his mind, oh, I can't throw in the towel. I've made the following comments on IFL TV to get a few extra views. You know, but essentially he's made a rod for his own back. I think the comments he's made are so, you know, and all of this Warriors code business is quite entertaining. The comments he's made are so, you know, over the top
Ridiculous.
and about, you know, Kell Brook's situation was actually the greatest gift he could have had, because that was his opportunity to prove himself. You know, that if he is forced to throw in the towel on his son, which any good cornerman may have to at some stage, he's almost made it impossible to do that, and I think that's dangerous and that's unfortunate. You know, but we shall see. We shall see. Jay, let's bring you in, both on the fight itself, Eubank Abraham, the pay-per-view status, the comments. Off you go, mate.
It's a lovely fight. I think it's a great fight. I think it's perfectly timed for, I wouldn't say for both men, but definitely for Eubank Jr. He was at a position where he was a laughing stock. He still is pretty much, but you know, he was a laughing stock. He fought Quinlan. You know, I must have waxed lyrical with people for hours about how despicable this is being on pay-per-view and who the hell is this guy. And we knew it was going to be a walkover. So we were desperate to see Eubank Jr. in some sort of test. I think Abraham is a test. I think it's a good test. Abraham's, although been around for a while, is a seasoned professional, been in with big names, been in with some tough guys. So for me, it's a good fight. It's a good test to see how far Eubank is, how good he is. More than likely, unfortunately, his youth and effervescence will take over in this fight and prove him to be the winner just purely through work rate, because as Jet said, he's not going to stop him. Abraham's never, I don't think he's ever been stopped. So yeah, it's not a pay-per-view fight, get it right. It's not a pay-per-view fight, but it's better. Eubank, now he's going to constantly be on pay-per-view. He's not going to, you know, he's not going to turn his back on that now. He's there. He started it, so he's got to finish it. Unless he gets some ridiculous amount of money, and the only way he's going to get that is through pay-per-view. So he's going to stay on pay-per-view. It's very interesting. I think his step will be Sauerland with Abraham. He beats Abraham, and then he fights the winner of Paul Smith and Tyrone Zuger, because they are the WBA belt. It's a belt, and there's obviously some sort of relationship if Solon can work with the Eubanks, which he seemingly has done. I think that's the way it's going to go. I think that's, and then I think if Eubank wins, it opens him with the name of Abraham on his record. It opens him to big fights with Groves and De Gale. Again, Groves a Solon fighter, so it's more than likely that that's a fight that will happen before the De Gale fight, and De Gale's injured, etc. So I think it's quite a shrewd opponent for Chris Eubank Jr. and it's certainly one that I want to watch.
Yeah, you get the impression that it's the right guy at the right time. Saying that though, I mean, Arthur Abraham, he's a hell of a lot better than these guys Eubank's been beating, isn't he? Is there any risk whatsoever that Abraham causes problems?
I think there's always a risk when you put in someone like Abraham into a fight with someone else who's unproven, really. As I said, he's been in with some real top guys, and so he is a good name on the record. But maybe they're seeing that as Jet said, he's kind of in a decline now. So as I said, Eubank Jr.'s fitness, his work rate should really, because Abraham tends to start slow. What he'll do towards the end of rounds, he'll start to put in a bit of work and try and win the rounds that way. So he has a lackadaisical sort of style and tempo. So I think just purely out of pressure, he will win it. I can't see him knocking Eubank out. And if Eubank could make a big statement, then it is a statement in world boxing for the other opponents that can possibly bring, and one of them I would say is Groves, because Groves would go to IEV pay-per-view and it would be big numbers for Eubank Groves pay-per-view. So it's very shrewd. It's very shrewd, I think.
Yeah, it's certainly a name that both the UK fans and the global boxing population are very aware of. Jay, one name that's synonymous with Chris Eubank Jr. is, of course, longtime rival Billy Joe Saunders. Since we did the last podcast, it has transpired that Billy Joe Saunders' next opponent, Kurt Cedez, is a world-leading gangster who has been arrested for a variety of grade A crimes and is unlikely to be boxing anytime soon. Now, clearly not Frank Warren's fault, not Billy Joe Saunders' fault, but sorely another very, very, very big blow to a career in Billy Joe Saunders that has literally zero momentum.
Yeah, you couldn't write that, really. A RICO charge, which is usually synonymous with the mafia, etc., etc. So how unlucky is Billy Joe Saunders? I mean, it's just unbelievable. This guy has had so many, and it must be difficult for him, for someone who isn't a gym bunny and doesn't really spend time in the gym out between fights and can put on. It'd be difficult to keep picking yourself off the ground and keep going and keep, desperately trying to keep up that level of fitness in and out of the ring and that discipline when it's someone who is obviously not disciplined. So it's just very unlucky. They've got to find him an opponent quick, because he's been linked so much with Golovkin and Canelo and those sort of fighters. It's hard to bring in another opponent, at this time. So I don't really know where he goes. Hopefully Frank Warren has got something up his sleeve and can pull out an opponent, or it's another postponement and it's another period of time for Billy Joe Saunders to be out of the gym and get unfit again. Yeah.
I mean, for what it's worth, Frank seems to have done a fairly good job with that bill. Even though Billy Joe Saunders is off it, there's a number of real exciting trade fights on there. There's the rematch between Darrell Williams and Jermaine Smile. There's Leon Woodstock, Anthony Yard, Daniel Dubois, a few other names. Understand that Bradley Skeet and even Huey Fury could feature. So it's a good bill, but I think losing Billy Joe Saunders perhaps loses the star power, and the fact that Josh Taylor and Ahara Davis is on the same night on terrestrial TV probably means that what is a very, very, very good bill will unfortunately fly under the radar there, I'm afraid. But fascinating to see what happens next with Billy Joe Saunders, and he's a very, very unlucky guy, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think it's good that Warren has these stock of fighters now. That he needs this, and he's building nicely, Frank Warren, and he does like a trade fight. He kind of recognises that that will bring in punters, but from and it is a good card, but from a personal view for Billy Joe Saunders, it's just very unfortunate, and it's very frustrating because I personally want to see him do well, and I want to see him in big fights because I like to watch him. So but there are names, and within a year, 18 months time, Dubois and Yard are really going to start holding up cards by themselves, really.
Absolutely. And Leon Woodstock's another one who could potentially fall into that mix. Well, one other thing I'll say on Billy Joe Saunders, I'm very unclear if Billy Joe Saunders is still with Adam Booth. Very unclear. And, when Billy Joe signed with Adam Booth, I actually made a video there speculating that may not be a partnership made in heaven. A lot of fighters go to Adam Booth and seem to leave. There's quite a track record of fighters doing slightly shorter periods with Adam Booth. And I think Billy Joe Saunders really needed some stability. I'm unclear if he's still with Adam Booth. I noticed Adam Booth didn't appear to be at the press conference. That's not to say that I can confirm he's left Adam Booth, but it's very, very strange what's going on with the Billy Joe Saunders camp. And he needs momentum, activity, and stability immediately, or his career is going to go down the drain, I'm afraid.
It's interesting to say that because I saw the interview on IFL with Booth when he was talking about Burnett, and he said that you have to do it sort of my way. This is the way we do it. This is how we do it. Can't do it like that. And I think Andy Lee said the same sort of thing. Then we're not going to work together, and that just gave me reminiscent of why Eubank left. You can't criticise your trainer. This is how we do it. This is how I want it to be done. If you criticise me, you can't work with me. Simple as that. And Billy Joe Saunders doesn't seem the type of character that would quite easily fit into Booth's methods or his mould of that he wants. And when a fighter, like for instance David Haye, has been around so much and seen so much, for them to slip back into being, almost having a teacher, a disciplinarian to guide them through their training, I think it's very difficult with someone with quite a big personality like Billy Joe Saunders.
Yeah, 100%. Eubank left quite quickly, as you say. Haye left, Groves left, David Price left, two-time world champion Nathan Cleverly did some work with Adam Booth and decided not to stay. There's been a few guys coming and going there. So let's see how it all pans out. But it's interesting nevertheless. Jet, talk to me about Adrian Broner versus Mikey Garcia. How excited are you for that one, mate?
Oh, that's a fantastic fight. I would say I'd like to see Jorge Linares versus Mikey Garcia, but this is a close second. Fantastic fight. Adrian Broner, flashy, got hand speed, and he's pretty good from 140 under. At 147, I think he's very small, but at 140 he could do some damage. Do think his fundamental problem's probably always been his footwork. He's been quite plodding, but his hand speed and powers kind of got him through his career. But obviously he's won a number of world titles in numerous weight classes. So is Mikey Garcia. For me, favour Mikey Garcia. I think youth and upside. I do think they're both at a stage in their career that they need a marquee victory. Mikey Garcia is coming off a long layoff, but Broner's obviously he's coming off a decent win against Adrian Granados, even though it was at 147. But for me, as I said, I favour Mikey Garcia. I do think he's got very good punching power, and I do think his fundamentals are probably slightly better than Broner's. But Broner's always in there with a puncher's chance, and that hand speed might cause Mikey Garcia some problems. But I do think he's very low output, so that may play a factor in this fight. Whether or not it's a stoppage, I don't think he'll stop Broner. I do think he'll probably win on points. but it's a good thing he gets to keep his world title and, you know, move back down to lightweight after, if he needs to, if the opportunities arise, and maybe get a world title unification there as well.
Yeah, I think we've got to give a little bit of credit to Broner for taking the fight. You know, Broner's consistently proved that he's happy and willing and able to take these big fights, to throw himself in there against the big names. And, you know, Broner's a guy who's fought at higher weight classes than he should have done. He's never been knocked out. He's shown heart in defeats when he's fought the bigger guys. And I don't think he's going to be easy work for Mikey Garcia whatsoever. I don't think Mikey Garcia will be as good at 140 as he was at 135. I actually think Adrian Broner is potentially the most formidable opponent that he's faced in his career. And I don't think Adrian Broner will be as easy work for Mikey Garcia. Having said all of that, Mikey Garcia has to be a favourite in the fight. Broner has shown vulnerability. He's never lost at light welterweight or below. But, you know, he has shown vulnerability. There is a blueprint to beat him. And whilst Mikey Garcia possesses a very, very different style to the guys who've beaten him in the past, you'd have to say that Mikey Garcia is a real favourite in this fight, I guess, Jet.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you totally, mate. You know, I think Mikey Garcia has to be a favourite just based on his last few performances. I know Broner had a decent win. I know it was a split decision against Adrian Granados, but he did struggle at times against Granados with the pressure. For me, you know, Garcia will probably come in and just try and box and range, and if the opportunity arises and he hurts Broner, then he might step on the gas. But I do think he'll be very cautious. You know, Broner's shown actually excellent punch power. He hurt Porter very bad in their fight in the final round, and he's definitely a very good puncher. Let's put it that way, and he's got fast hands, so he'll definitely cause Garcia problems throughout the fight, I do think. But I think Garcia, you know, maybe a bit cuter than some of the opponents that Broner's faced previously in his career. So, yeah, I'd have to agree with you and probably say Garcia is the favorite. But it's not a gimme fight, you know. I wouldn't be surprised to see. I wouldn't be surprised if Broner wins the fight. I'd just pick Garcia just on a bit of, you know, he's got a bit of momentum, a very good momentum in his career as well. Dejan's Latikanen in the third round, and the win against, that win, and there was another win, I think. But yeah, he's got good momentum. He's fresh as well. He hasn't really taken any. He's not been in any recent wars as well, so he's recharged and ready to go, I think. So yeah, I'd expect him to win a decision, maybe a close decision.
Interesting. Another topic, Jet. Joshua Buatsi signs with Eddie Hearn. I haven't heard anything yet regarding Joe Joyce. You know, no updates regarding Joe Joyce and his future and what he's going to go with in the pro ranks. But what are your thoughts on Buatsi with Eddie Hearn? Do you think he's got the style to make big waves in the pro ranks?
Yeah, definitely. I think he looked very good at the 2016 Olympics. I think he was probably the pick of the bunch, to be honest. He looked like he had good fundamentals and he had really good punching power. So I definitely think he could adapt very well to the pro game. He could develop similar to Anthony Joshua. They'll probably fast track him and, you know, getting contenders probably in his 14th or 15th fight. I don't understand. I don't know what sort of weight class he might campaign at. I think he's about 6 foot, so I'm expecting him to fight at light heavyweight, because I think he fought at light heavyweight in the amateurs. I know there sometimes if you fight at light heavy, you tend to go fight at super middle, but yeah, he looks the part, and he should make waves if he continues to progress as a professional. Joe Joyce, I actually read an article about him just before he came on air, and he was talking about the European Championships next year. So I don't know if he's a part of the European Championships, or he was talking about, I think he was talking about some of the guys that are going to the Euros next year. So that's pretty much the only sort of that's the only sort of news I've heard of Joe Joyce recently.
Fantastic. Okay. 150 you guys watching live. If you are one of those, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't done so before. Jay, did you want to get in on Broner Garcia or Buatsi, any of those guys, mate?
I think Garcia Broner is a really good fight. I personally think Garcia will win that quite handedly. I know Broner has the good punching power and can change a fight that way, but I don't think his head's right. His head's not been right for quite a while. Garcia, on the other hand, he's fresh. He's had time out. He's eager. He's looking to push forward. And I think Garcia will win that fight. As far as Buatsi, it's a good signing. I think Mikey tweeted that it could be Joe Joyce, like you said, and I said spot on. That's the man they're going to. I forgot about Buatsi, and he's a really good amateur. It's a good division to come into, and he's in the perfect place for an Olympian to be guided correctly in his career. Eddie Hearn is what he's good at, isn't he? Picking fights and guiding people to where they want to be. So we'll just see whether he can, like many other fighters, whether he can adapt to the professional game.
100%. Yeah. I think Eddie Hearn does run a slight risk, personally, is my belief, of having too many of these Olympian fighters or too many of the guys at 4-round or 6-round level. I mean, how many of these guys are there at present? You know, Cordina, Fowler, Conor Benn, Buatsi, Josh Kelly, Lawrence Okoli. I mean, there's so many of those guys, and that's not even including like the sort of next gen fighters coming through. I think there's a risk that some of the lesser names may kind of get lost in the mix a little bit. I think he's going to be, you know, throwing Katie Taylor as well. There's so many of these fighters who at the minute tend to be fighting the sort of 4-round, 6-round fights. It's kind of hard to work out how he's going to be able to put pure focus into all of them. But, you know, Buatsi, clearly a very, very good signing. Made a lot of waves in the Olympics, and seems to be the kind of guys who can do something in the pros. So we'll watch with interest. I'll ask both of you guys, Jay and Jet, do either of you know the name Andres Gutierrez?
Yeah, Carl Frampton's opponent.
Indeed. Had you heard of him, Jet?
I actually watched 1 or 2 fights of him because he fought a well-known sort of contender. That was the only fight I've actually seen. 1 or 2 fights of him. I haven't seen much of him.
Ah, amazing. Okay, so give us your take on him. Is he? How's he gonna stack up against the likes of Carl Frampton?
Yeah, I mean, he lost against a contender called Christian Mijares. He has about 50 wins and 8 losses or something like that, and he fought for the WBC silver version of the belt. And yeah, he lost the fight. He didn't look so good. That was probably his big step up fight. So yeah, he's got a good record, but I definitely think he's a more than beatable opponent for. He's more than beatable for Frampton. You know, Frampton should do a pretty easy number on him, to be honest. But that's my take on it. He might underestimate him, similar to how he did against Gonzalez. But for me, if he's looking to get back in the mix, it's a good opponent in terms of just on paper. It's a good opponent. So I don't think Gutierrez, from what I've seen of him, I've only seen 1 or 2 fights. I haven't seen much, but from what I've seen of him, he won't give Frampton any problems. Frampton should, box circles, or he could probably stop him if I'm honest. But I guess we'll wait and see come the fight. But at least he's back in action. It's a WBC World title eliminator. So I don't know if you read that, but I know Diaz or Warrington, one of those guys are the mandatory for Russell. So Frampton will probably move into number 3 or 4.
Interesting. Okay. Jay, any take on that matchup, mate?
It's a cash-in, keep busy fight. I hadn't heard of him. I'm not so much of a geek as Jet is. I would go through that. But I did look at his. No offense. I did look at his box rec. It's the first time that Frampton's fought in Belfast for a couple of years, so it's a homecoming. I think he probably spent so much time trying to get that Santa Cruz fight and so much effort that it didn't really play out how possibly he wanted it to. And I think it's just a cash-in fight, bring him home, sell out, big numbers, a fight that I didn't know it's for a WBC title eliminator. So that's interesting, but it's a good option for him. Get through that fight, get back into a world title fight. You know, it's not going to damage him too much. It should be easy night's work.
Yeah. Okay. Last thing I've got down on the news section, and to be honest, this has been discussed elsewhere extensively. David Haye splits with Shane McGuigan. Could it be that Shane McGuigan advised him to retire? Could it be that Shane McGuigan said, I can still train you, but we're not going to be doing it on a yacht if we want to be victorious? What do you guys make of this story?
I watched the video that Ultratech Sport did, shout out, and he got it spot on. And like I said earlier, this is a guy that's been around the block, that knows his body and the way he wants to do things, and it obviously doesn't fit into the way Shane McGuigan trains or wants to train. And as you said, he doesn't want to train on a yacht. You know, he just looked like he was along for the ride. I did hear, I'm not sure where I heard it, that he's now going to be training with, is it Luke Campbell's trainer? Is that right? I did hear that somewhere, and I'm not sure where I heard it, so I might be wrong, but I did hear he was going to train with is it Rubio? Is it Rubio? Yeah.
I heard a different name, actually. I heard it on the Boxing Voice.
Oh, right.
I can't quite remember the guy's name, though. I don't know. Somebody will put it in the chat for us. But on the Boxing Voice the other day, they were discussing David Haye working with a new trainer. So
right, okay. I thought it was Luke Campbell's trainer, because he trains over. Luke Campbell trains. Does he train in Miami or Florida or somewhere like that?
Yeah, he trains in Miami.
Yeah, so that would kind of make sense for David Haye really to be in the sun, but I'm not 100%. But yeah, it's David Haye's his own man. He's his own entity. You know, he's a marketing genius. He's a name in himself, isn't he? So you're going to have a very strong, I think, older trainer really to sort of, you know, put up with him and his antics.
Yeah. I'm sure that's right. I'm just having a look in the chat. Nobody has actually commented there, so maybe I've just dreamt that. Maybe because somebody else would have heard that, definitely. But yeah, Jet, did you want to get in on that one at all, mate?
No, not really. I mean, you know, David Haye, we all know. I done a video last week, I think, and we all, you know, we all kind of knew the writing was on the wall. Shane McGuigan never really looked motivated to train him out in Miami. He always looked like he was like, why the hell am I here? And yeah, I definitely think he probably thought, well, I'm here, but I don't really want to be here. I could be with Carl Frampton, or I could be with Conrad Cummings or George Groves, and you know, help them, you know, with their respective fights or a fight that could have been made. So yeah, nothing really to add. You know, David Haye, for me, his career is rapidly coming to a close. Let's put it that way.
So Ishmael Salas.
That's the name I meant, Jay. Yeah.
Right, okay. Yeah. Well, that's I've just read that. So perhaps that's it. It's a Barthelemy's trainer. And
yeah, based in Vegas, I think.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Top rank. Yeah. West Las Vegas.
I was hearing about, but yeah, Rubio would be interesting. I don't know how much he would put up with the ego that is David Haye at this stage of his career, but
yeah.
We'll have to wait and see, I guess. Guys, without further ado, let's move on to next week's boxing. It's 3 fights that I put down to discuss. Sergey Kovalev versus Andre Ward, the rematch, clearly merits discussion. I was quite interested. You guys know I'm a heavyweight geek. I was quite interested in Ian Lewison versus Robert Helenius. And of course, we have to give a mention to Paul Smith in a world title fight against Tyrone Zoiga. So, yeah, let's start with Kovalev Ward. I think that fight merits the respect to go first against Ian Lewison and Paul Smith. I hope you guys don't disagree. Yeah, give us I suppose in either one of you can go first. Give us your sort of breakdown and prediction for this fight ahead.
Jay, you go. I'll let you go first this one.
Well, Kovalev Ward or Ward Kovalev. Yeah, great fight. Really excited about it again. First fight had so much controversy. I watched it back again today. Very interesting. First time really I've probably seen Ward in some sort of trouble at times. Now there's real hate between these now. It's really been built up over the months through different reasons. It's quite interesting to see how this is going to play out. The first one was so tight, but I'm kind of convinced that Kovalev will let his emotions go in this one, and which can be a bit of a concern, because if he does that, he could become reckless. He needed in the first fight to put his foot on the gas a lot more, throw some more punches, and he kind of knows going into this fight that he's got to prove that he is the clear winner. So that means he's got to have to put more pressure on and be more offensive than he was. Now, Ward at the same time will have worked out what Kovalev does well, his little tricks that he's going to use, his little dirty tactics that he likes to use. So it's all dependent on one, how the emotions are. I think Ward can keep his emotions under control a lot better than Kovalev can do. It's how the fighters adapt from the first fight. Ward, such a good technical fighter, will adapt a lot better than Kovalev, I think, to the way he approaches the fight. There's always a chance, obviously, with Kovalev with the big punch, knocking down Ward in the second round. Didn't really hurt Ward, I don't think. I don't think he was really that shook up by that knockdown. More surprised, if anything. So it's going to be interesting to see how these guys take what they learned from the first fight and bring it into the second fight. So yeah, it's very interesting. I had Kovalev win the first fight, as Kovalev believed. So we'll definitely see how it's going to play out.
Yeah, do you have a strong lean for this one, Joe?
I think Ward will win this fight.
Yeah.
I think Broner will win this because, as I said, I think he's the fighter more likely to adapt to styles and work out a better plan. I think he's got more technical ability, so he can switch it up a little bit rather than Kovalev. I think he knows one way to fight, and that's the way he's going to go out. And I think he's going to go out and he's going to try and bowl him over, and in the first 3-4 rounds, really go at him and see how Ward takes the pressure.
Yeah,
and hopefully connect.
I'll throw my 2 pennies in. I think, on balance, I agree with you there, Jay. I think Kovalev's going to really throw down in the early rounds. I think Ward's going to have to weather the storm and adapt. 9 times out of 10, when two guys who are boxers, when you've got two guys having a rematch in what was a close fight first time round, I slightly favour the better technical boxer out of the two, because I subscribe to the theory that 9 times out of 10, the better technical boxer will be able to make the adjustments, bring the variety to, really establish the lead in the second fight. I believe that Ward's experience he will have gained against Kovalev will be of huge benefit for him going into the rematch. And I actually believe towards the end of that fight, the end of the first fight, Ward was already successfully making the adjustments, especially on the inside against a guy like Sergey Kovalev. So I suspect he will bring those adjustments again and will be able to establish the lead. Now, I think 9 times out of 10, I'm inclined to go with the boxer in a rematch. So one example I'd give, if you look at Floyd Mayweather versus Marcus Maidana. Now, Floyd won both fights, but let's agree the first fight was very, very close, very competitive, whereas Floyd won very wide in the second fight. There are, of course, exceptions to the rule. I pretty much said the same thing as this when Carl Frampton fought Leo Santa Cruz in the rematch. I said Frampton found the answers in fight 1. Frampton's the superior boxer. I expect Frampton to win even wider in the second fight. And, on that occasion, it was Santa Cruz who brought the variety in. Whilst I think Kovalev is the inferior boxer technically to Ward, Kovalev can box. So we shouldn't rule it out at a balanced probability that Kovalev could actually bring something new or bring a new game plan or a new tactic. But all in all, I picked Ward to win the first fight. I do believe Ward did win the first fight by the skin of his teeth. I believe Ward is a guy who is probably going to retire from the sport undefeated. And I think, yet again, Andre Ward will find the answers this weekend. So I'm pretty much siding with Jay and pretty much on the same logic as Jay there. On with Ward. Jet, over to you, pal.
Yeah, I'd have to go with Ward as well, I'll be honest. I hate having to agree, well, or at least the chat hates when everyone agrees. It's nice to have some diversity. But yeah, I'd have to agree with the logic. I mean, you know, when you have a rematch, you tend to go with the guy who can adapt and he has more fundamental skills. Don't get me wrong, Kovalev is a very good boxer. You know, when he wants to box, he can box. He showed it against John Pascal. He showed it against a couple of other guys. So, you know, he can box, but I do think Ward's probably learned from the first fight. I think he will be smarter, cuter, more calculated. I think Virgil Hunter will tell him, go out, be cautious, but use the jab, be wise out there. And I think in the first fight, I thought he probably just moved up. You know, he fought, was it Alexander Brand in a pushover fight, and he didn't really set himself up properly. I think this fight, I think he knows the danger in front of him, that is Sergei Kovalev. Yeah, I'm on the same sort of thought process as you guys, that Ward will win, but I think it'll still be a close fight. I don't think he'll win very wide. I think it might be 7-5, 8-4, maybe something like that. It'll be a very competitive fight, and some of the rounds will be very close. But I expect Ward to you know, be a bit sharper in the early rounds, and you know, kind of continue down the stretch as well.
Good stuff.
I don't think we can underestimate how good Ward is. You know how good he is. You know, because he's not that pretty to watch or that exciting to watch, but technically he's so very good. And technical fighters as good as Ward, like Floyd Mayweather, have that ability just to change it up, to think out the box a little bit, you know. And I know what you say about us always agreeing and we get stick in the comments, and it's true, but I can't see it. I know Kovalev, okay, playing devil's advocate, Kovalev has that power, and if he leaps on him, can really hurt anyone. But I just think that Ward is, as you said, Tom, will possibly retire undefeated, and maybe we might look back in years to come and see how really good he was. Ward's a fighter that's, unfortunately, you know, you look at the names, he's beaten who he can beat. You know, he's beaten the best of you know, who's out there. So I just think that you know, technically he will be able to get away from Kovalev and outsmart him.
Yeah. It's a great fight. For me, it's still two of the top pound for pound fighters on you know, in the world. I'm very, very much looking forward to it, but I just think Ward is the only guy I can pick. Sorry to jump around a bit, because I did say the news was over, but I did just want to mention, I actually forgot that Rocky Fielding versus JB Cox has been announced and confirmed by Eddie Hearn. So I won't go through that in too much detail now, because it was one we discussed in a bit more detail in the previous pod, because it looked like it was going to get made. But just to confirm to everyone watching that fight is going ahead. Jet, let me ask you about the other fights for this weekend. Paul Smith versus Zoiga, Lewison versus Helenius. Give us your takes on those matchups and maybe your predictions as well.
Yeah. Also, I just wanted to add on the Ward, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
I just wanted to say, it's two great fighters. You know, as you said, probably pound for pound fighters. But I'm a bit mystified actually to the low profile of the fight. You know, the fight hasn't really been pushed over here in the UK. Normally, you get the buzz going, and you know, especially I know it's a bit different with Joshua Klitschko and Brooks Spence, those sort of guys. But the fight itself has had a very, very low profile and a very low build up in the last few weeks. So yeah, I was a bit surprised by that. But yeah, anyway.
I completely agree. In fact, yeah, when I wrote the email to you guys this morning with the details of what we're going to cover in this night's podcast, I didn't actually mention Ward Kovalev. because I had actually forgot it was actually happening this weekend.
Yeah, I just think it's flown so much on the radar. It's crazy, man. But yeah, great fight. Just want to put that out there. Helenius versus Lewison. Do you know what? I didn't even know that until you told me, or until I saw it in the chat. So yeah, I didn't even know. But for me, Helenius he's decent at a certain level. I know he got, pretty badly knocked out by Johan Duhaupas, but he is decent at a certain level. I would have picked Chisora to beat him, to be honest, but Helenius, Lewison is he's slightly slicker than Chisora, but he obviously won't bring the pace and the pressure. And depending on what shape he's in, I don't think he's going to be in the best of shape, to be honest. He hasn't really fought since the David Allen fight. Was it David Allen or Dillian White? Sorry, yeah, Dillian White fight. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, he hasn't really fought. So, yeah, I'm not really too sure on Ian Lewison. I do think he's got good skills. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, just the conditioning will put me off. So I'm going to pick Helenius in that fight. Kovalev versus Ward. Obviously, I've done. I think Tyrone Zoiga. Pick Zoiga, but he is beatable. I do think he performed decently against DeCarolis in the second fight. I thought he was actually winning the first fight as well. I think that was a draw. So yeah, Zoiga's respectable at a certain level, but I know the Sauerland brothers were talking him up as the next big thing. Him and Vincent Fagenboots, but yeah, they're not anything like that. So yeah, Zoiga's okay. He's like he is the level that his belt suggests, WBA and the GBU belt. So technically he's a unified champion, but obviously we know he's not. But yeah, I'd expect Zoiga to win by a fair sort of decision, 8-4, something like that. 8-4, maybe 9-3. Smith will be competitive in a couple of rounds, but yeah, Zoiga should have a bit too much. But Zoiga loses to the other top guys at 168. Ramirez will school him. Groves will probably KO him, to be honest. James DeGale will just run circles around him. And then, I don't know about Callum Smith. I prefer not to talk about Callum Smith. He's pretty underwhelming, let's put it that way.
Yeah. Let's. I totally agree with what you're saying on Paul Smith versus Tyrone Zoiga. I think that's probably how I picked the fight as well. With regards to Lewison Helenius, I actually think that's a very interesting fight. Helenius is good. A fairly rigid, one-dimensional operator who relies on a very stiff construct and his size and throws out a jab without any sort of slickness to his game at all. I also think he gets very, very tired after 3 or 4 rounds and resorts to just following opponents around the ring, throwing a jab. He's undoubtedly, got a bit of power. He's undoubtedly got a bit of class, in the style that he does bring to the ring. But I actually think if Lewison turns up in decent enough shape, he actually could beat Helenius here. I think a guy who's a bit slippery, a bit slick, a guy who can create some awkwardness in terms of dipping under jabs and counterpunching is really the kind of guy who can cause a huge amount of issues and problems for someone as stiff as Robert Helenius. Having said all of that, Lewison is a guy who routinely turns up to fights not in shape, and I've got no reason to suspect that this is any different. I believe he took the fight at relatively short notice after Derek Chisora pulled out, which doesn't bode well. Having said that, it did look like he was going to get a big fight with David Allen and a few other fights that he's been linked with as well. So potentially he will have been ticking over in the gym, hopeful to achieve one of those fights. But that could well be an interesting fight. Lewison is very durable. He's a lot more slick and a lot more skilled than Robert Helenius. But Helenius is maybe the bigger man and perhaps the harder hitter and the guy with the more momentum. But an interesting fight if Lewison doesn't turn up too heavy, which is the big if. Jay, let's bring you back in, mate, both for your take on Paul Smith and Ian Lewison, if you've got anything to add on that one, pal.
Paul Smith Zoya is the worst fight in a very, very, very long time. Zoya is terrible. He's rubbish. Paul Smith is rubbish. I watched Zoya against Ekpo. Wow, Ekpo should have won that. Simple as that. And Ekpo had never fought out of Accra or Lagos. I think maybe once. When the scorecards were announced, if you watch it and you see, I think it's Kali Saulin's face, the relief in that guy's face was unbelievable. And if you watch by ringside, on one side he had Arthur Abraham sitting next to him, and the other side he had Paul Smith sitting next to him. So that fight has been this fight has been planned for a long time, and this is why I say the connection with Abraham, Eubank, Paul Smith, Zoya, it's all tied up. No one's held that WBA belt of note for a very long time. It's just an awful fight, and I don't know who's going to win that, because I don't rate either of them. So I'd be hard to pick. I dread it if Paul Smith wins, because the amount of stuff that's going to come out on Twitter and out of Eddie Hearn's mouth is going to be ridiculous. So that's all I've got to say about that fight. Helenius Lewison. I think you're right. It could be an interesting fight. I think it does depend on how Lewison turns up and what sort of shape he's in. Helenius, he's a bit plodding. Lewison, we know it's been talked about that he's got really good technical skills and he's a good boxer. But as you said, I think he can win. I think but again, it will come down to what sort of condition he's in, whether he's been in the gym, whether he's been training hard. From what you see off his Twitter and his Instagram, etc., he is doing the work. So, and it's a good opportunity for him. It's a good name for him, and it'll push him onto bigger and better fights. Helenius, it's not really going to do much for his career. Helenius has fought some half decent opponents. He's never going to be a world champion. I doubt whether he'll ever get a big fight because his name's not big enough. He tends to fight in Finland a lot. So yeah, we'll just wait and see. Really, again, I'll definitely watch it because I'm interested to follow Ian Lewison's career.
Yeah, and you look back at some of the old Robert Helenius fights. I do believe he's beatable, and I do believe Ian Lewison at his best does beat him. But Ian Lewison at his best is maybe something that is very, very hard to come by, and certainly hasn't been seen in a ring for, well, probably you could even say prior to his prize fighter days. But anyway, I digress.
But that's something that's been talked about for a while, isn't it? About how good he could have been or how good he could be, and it's down to him whether he really wants to, take it really seriously. I know you've spoke to him, haven't you, Tom, on the channel, and he comes across really well, a really nice guy, and he's obviously took this fight. Is it for money? Is it for opportunity? I don't really know.
It's funny though. There's certain heavyweights out there. I mean, okay, you look at the likes of David Price, Derek Chisora, Robert Helenius. These guys don't have half the talent for me of an Ian Lewison or of a Mike Perez. I'm not talking about what they've done in the ring. I'm just talking about pure talent. If we look at talented fighters, guys like Odlanair Solis, Mike Perez, Ian Lewison, they just eat their careers away, and it's a real shame. And we'll have to see how Lewison does against Helenius. But if he gets the upset win against Helenius, then he's right back in the mix. I guess that's one of the things about the heavyweight division is one punch, and Helenius has been knocked out relatively recently. You land one punch and you find yourself in a big title fight, I guess. So it's one that I'll be keeping an eye on.
There's that level of fighters, though, isn't there, Tom? You've got that elite of the heavyweight at the top, and then you've got like the next level down, where you've got the Heleniuses, the Duhaupas, Dimitrenko, Lucas Brown. You've got that Chisora. You've sort of got that level, and it's that gap between the two, really. And if you're lucky enough and you fight the right person at the right time, and the rankings are a crazy thing, as we know, you can get a shot. But because there's so many big fights to be made with the top champions, it's becoming either less and less, easier to make those fights because there's more pressure on the big names to fight each other.
Yeah. There's kind of like a second tier, isn't there, around that Euro level? And I guess there's some relatively interesting trade fights to be made between them. With opportunities like these, perhaps.
Yeah, I think they know that. They know that. So Hellenius will fight for his paycheck at that sort of level, and then once in a blue moon, they'll get an opportunity through a pullout or whatever to get a big name. They get that big name, they get beat, they make the big money, and then they come back down to their level again. That sort of seems the way it goes.
Definitely. Cool. Guys, that's got through our agenda for this week. Covered a lot of ground. We've done it in about 90 minutes. As I say, there hasn't been the biggest boxing in the last 2 weeks. Obviously, next time we might have a slightly larger panel, and we'll probably be discussing a controversial Ward versus Kovalev decision, or even a knockout. Who knows? So I'm sure it'll be a busier show next week. But yeah, I think we've got through what we need to. Jay, Jet, is there anything else from either of you before we call it a night? Anything else you want to add into the mix?
From me.
Quigley Carroll, which should be a decent fight. I'm interested to see how John O'Carroll gets on. And
is that this week, is it?
Yeah, it's for the IBF East West Super Featherweight title.
The East West, hey?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's their version of the European IBF European. You know how the WBO have a European title? It's the same thing. Yeah, it's the same thing as that, basically.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, Paul Highland won from the Belfast card.
Fair enough. Yeah, I recall now. Anything else from yourself, Jet?
No, nothing from me, mate.
Cool. Well, in that case, I will thank you both very, very much for your time this evening. Thanks for, ripping yourself away from your lives for 90 minutes to discuss boxing with me. And I'll also say thanks to everyone who's been in the chat. It's 120 of you still with us. So if you are still here, please hit the thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel. Please also check out Jet's channel at Boxing Discussions. But yeah, without further ado, I'll call it a night there. And thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Cheers, Tom. And in honour of Irish Tom, I'll say a happy Wednesday.
Au revoir.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.